What we'd like to state is that 4 days ahead of the 2017 election, we're issuing this pre-election statement based on, as Sam has told us, a long period of pre-election observation and analysis. And another important objective of this meeting is to announce that we will be having an election center where we will be open to the public, and this election center, which we'll talk more about, but it will be open to receive reports and process reports from member organizations, election observations from around the country on election day and thereafter. And these observations will be used to disseminate regular statements, and it will also be open for the public. And this will be based at the Kenya Human Rights Commission on Gitanga Road, and will be open from 8 August through 11th August from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. on those days. And the election center will remain available until all results are announced, but we'll go into more detail on the election center at the end of the statement. I just felt it was important that we announce that right at the outset, so as many people as possible can hear about this. Overall, Kura Yangu Sauti Yangu notes a pre-election period that has been marked by a clear lack of respect for constitutional standards of integrity, public participation, and public expression. On a technical level, Kura Yangu has identified and assessed problems with legal reform, compressed and delayed timelines, procurement processes which are open to question, voter registration and the register of voters, which is still subject to very many critical questions at this late stage, party primaries which were shambolic and did not produce democratic outcomes, and a lack of clarity with regard to laws and regulations and a rising insecurity, and indeed some lack of clarity on regulations and pronouncements related to how the security forces will deal with insecurity or expected or anticipated incidents of unrest. We're also concerned by the Kenyan state's increasing attempts to unconstitutionally control and restrict public questioning of electoral preparedness, as well as to restrict public scrutiny of the electoral process, which reveals a worrying lack of respect for the sovereignty of the voter. Many of these problems were evident in 2013, and the lack of progress made in addressing them demonstrates the IEBC's and Parliament's lack of will to learn from the past, either lack of will or lack of capacity. And this also relates to other institutions such as various ministries and security agencies. Kura Yangu finds that the weaknesses of the pre-election period have severely compromised the integrity and credibility of the electoral process thus far. In order to promote and protect the legitimacy of and public faith in the results, we urge the IEBC and other authorities to immediately address the issues that relate to the remainder of the election cycle explained below. Which I'm going to now explain. We believe that even if there are problems, and we've said it again and again in all our public statements on the issue, we know that there are problems. We do not expect a perfect process, but we do expect proactive, clear, transparent outreach on the part of the IEBC and other bodies to explain how identified shortcomings will be dealt with. It's only by proactively communicating with the public that the very, very high levels of mistrust and anxiety around these elections can be addressed. And in the opposite way, not addressing these problems openly, making aggressive public statements which seem to threaten the freedom of expression and association, will increase mistrust and anxiety. In the minute there's a problem, it will be translated, it will be interpreted to mean that there is a problem with the integrity of the vote. So this is a very, very critical issue in terms of allaying public uncertainty about the credibility of the elections. In the pre-election period, we've already communicated the political and technical problems that have marred the 27 electoral process thus far. And we talked about problems such as the issues of failures in legal reform, the gender parity legislation, the failure to pass that, and then also the process of debating and passing amendments to the election laws, especially those that introduce the use of complementary mechanisms which undermine the democratic principle of dialogue and transparency. The failure to pass gender parity legislation, of course, puts the whole process in danger. We also talked about the fact that the IEBC's behavior was threatening public faith in its independence. And that faith in its independence is critical. Extreme delays in publishing the register of voters, necessitating legal action, and failure to explain how it will address the multiple problems raised in the audit of the register taint the verifiability of the voters' register. The IEBC's decision to appeal the High Court's judgment that presidential results announced at the constituency level are final also raised doubt about the Commission's independence and its stake in the result. Allegations of fraudulent procurement processes have left the impression that, while the faces at the IEBC may have changed, the ethos and approach remains unreformed. In fact, the IEBC has continually failed to respond to public demands for explanations on all manner of technical issues. And it appears sometimes that the IEBC has forgotten that its power and authority is derived from the Kenyan voters. This is not to take away from the examples when the IEBC has reached out positively and positively tried to address problems identified, but that has unfortunately been overshadowed by a perception of partisanship and non-responsiveness. We already spoke about the chaotic party primaries. I think that's work for us to do in future in terms of democratizing and creating genuine parties. Of particular concern is the issue of campaigning. Political campaigns have been marked by the blatant misuse of state resources by senior officials and by widespread voter bribery. The decision to exempt non-cash treats from the definition of bribery allows politicians free rein to distribute all manner of items to voters, thereby illegally influencing their choice at the ballot box and undermining the true value of elections. We've been very concerned at the blatant misuse of public resources and the blatant misuse of state power in these campaigns. This is a disregard of the Public Officer Ethics Act and of Chapter 6 of the Constitution, which lays these public officials open to punishment under these laws and to individualize actions on their failures to adhere to the laws. As far as election day is concerned, we're concerned about freedom of movement, guaranteed under Articles 37 and 39(1) of the Constitution of Kenya. It guarantees that every person has the right to peaceably assemble and to the freedom of movement. Assembly and movement take on special importance during elections, when voters necessarily want to participate in public campaign events, they want to vote, they want to witness the announcement of results, they want to inspect results and express their opinions and reactions, as long as they do so peaceably. In late July, Acting Interior Cabinet Secretary Fred Matiang'i announced that those who have not been accredited to be inside polling stations on election day will be removed from the polling station by all means necessary. That statement, in combination with IEBC regulations that grant presiding officers authority over an area of 400 meters around the center of a polling station, raised serious concern that voters will be prohibited from meaningful participation in their elections. Moreover, the selective prohibition of peaceful protests in Kisumu, as announced, I think, yesterday, which is an opposition stronghold, is a clear and discriminatory violation of the right to peacefully assemble. We note that in 2007, a majority of deaths, particularly in Kisumu, were caused by excessive state reaction. And we're concerned at this selective prohibition of constitutional rights. Now, we agree that it is reasonable to expect that non-accredited persons are not permitted to remain inside the polling station for purposes other than voting. But it is unreasonable to bar voters from congregating outside of the voting area, especially because they have a right to witness the polling station results as they are announced, if they so wish, and to scrutinize the written record of those results, which are required to be posted at the polling stations and accessible to the public. On security and violence, the recent killing of the IEBC's acting director of ICT, Chris Msando, has cast a grave pall over election preparations. As the official who oversaw the implementation of the Integrated Elections Management System, KEAMS, which includes biometric voter identification and electronic results transmission, Msando played a critical role. His murder has sparked serious fear about the security of the IEBC systems and the potential for outside intervention in the data that feeds that system. And those fears are, of course, informed by the situation in 2013 when, as we know, there was a spectacular collapse of the expensive technology acquired, including the electronic results transmission system. So these fears have been sparked and they've been intensified. His killing, Chris Msando's killing, took place against a general context of increased violence around the country, including between communities and between security forces and citizens. Additionally, the curfew in Lamu and ongoing security operations in Laikipia and Baringo threatened to depress voter turnout, as indeed does any intimidatory mobilization or deployment by the security forces. That may have an effect of suppressing voter participation. As election day approaches and the likelihood of mass public expression increases, it is critical for security forces to understand that Kenyans have a constitutional right to peacefully assemble and demonstrate, and that any threat of disorder should be met with professional policing standards of public assemblies. It's unfortunate that we still have several unanswered questions regarding the register of voters. First, the regulations governing voter identification suggest the existence of more than one register. The new rules state that if a voter cannot be identified in the biometric register on election day, the IEBC may look in the copy register to identify the voter. Now, the question is, if the copy register is supposed to be a printed copy of what is in the biometric list, why would a voter appear in one and not in the other? This regulation suggests that there are differences between the two lists, and this is something that the IEBC has to address to allay public concern. We're also concerned about the last-minute decisions, that voters' names will not be crossed off the register once they have voted, and we are still not clear on what represents a complementary mechanism for the identification of voters if they're not found in the register. Now, the IEBC has said that this is an anti-rigging mechanism, so that it's not easy to identify, exactly who has voted. But I think, in terms of the numbers of voters, which are then open to perhaps manipulation. But I think it's very important that they come out again and once again clarify to the Kenyan people what will happen if, as is very likely to happen in many cases, there are issues around voters who are registered and cannot be found on the, in order to vote. So even while we say that having a difference between the biometric and the paper register raises the risk that there are more than one register, eliminating it entirely means that there's no recourse for those who cannot be found in the biometric list. So I think that needs to be also clearly announced in order to avoid public disquiet and perhaps even unrest on election day. Furthermore, in April and May 2017, the IEBC gave the certified provisional biographic and certified provisional biometric registers of voters to KPMG for the firm's audit processes. Notably, the biometric list contained 1,162 more records than the biographic list. This difference has not been explained to date, and it needs to be explained. The IEBC has previously explained that some individuals' fingerprints could not be captured, meaning that, if anything, there should be fewer biometric records than biographic records. Why were there 1,162 more biometric records than biographic records? And that's something that the IEBC can very easily explain in the next couple of days. Second, there's a lack of clarity surrounding the use of the so-called Green Book. This record, which was in use during 2016 to 2017 mass voter registration exercises, is yet to be explained by the IEBC. Why was it used during registration? What purpose did it serve if voters were being registered using biometric technology? Will the Green Book be used to identify voters on election day? The re-emergence of the Green Book and the IEBC's refusal to acknowledge it and address public concerns around it demonstrates a worrying lack of commitment to transparency by the IEBC. It also suggests that the IEBC is not committed to one and only one register of voters. Overall, it calls into question the reliability of the voter registration process and the resulting data. Third, KPMG's audit of the register of voters revealed a wide range of problems with data in the register, including duplicate records, multiple voters sharing the same ID numbers, dead voters, and records with ID and passport numbers that lacked validity. Related to these issues is the problem of voters having been transferred without their knowledge or permission. It remains unclear how the IEBC will address these issues on election day and in the long term, and we need to have clear statements from the IEBC before election day on how they intend to address these problems. Thank you.